Hi folks, my name is David. I'm the minister here at Erskine Parish Church. It's great to have you connecting with us, and I'm so glad you found our online resources. If you were to come into our physical church, you would get one of these welcome packs, so consider this your digital welcome. However you've joined us, we'd love it if you could like and subscribe to our platform. That allows you to continue to see when we're putting up new content. And also, if you'd like to get in touch and actually connect with us, you can email at epcnotices@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Many analogies that we try and give for faith, because we're talking about mysteries and realities that are difficult to grasp at. And some of them are trite, and sometimes I use some of them with the younger children, you know, the likes of the guy going across the rope, and would we jump into the wheelbarrow, and using that for faith. I think that this vignette, this story, which is seen as one of the most expertly constructed stories in all of the history of literature, brings us into the heart of faith in a way that few other stories, analogies, anything else can do, particularly if you really spend time in it. And personally, the way I've found this text handled, I've very rarely found very satisfying. And I've spent a lot of time wrestling with this text. Probably, I don't want you to give you the impression that I don't normally work hard and really study and wrestle with a text, but went up a gear this week because you're dealing with difficult things, and I think we need to do the story justice. One of the ways that's common to characterize the story is that it's about Abraham's perfect obedience, and we just need to obey like Abraham did, and that's what really the story is all about. And I find that to be such an unsatisfactory flattening out of the great contours of the story. And then perhaps a more progressive view would be that this is just an ancient barbaric text from the Bronze Age, and so it doesn't really have anything to teach us because we know better than people sacrificing their kids and so on now. I don't find that helpful because I think we miss a lot of the power of what it is to exist in this world with faith. And so what do we do with it? Well, many of us are probably never going to be in the situation where God calls us and asks us to do anything this seemingly crazy, to sacrifice a child to the Lord. But we are going to face, and we have faced, and we do face deep anguish. Many of us have questions of God that seem unscrutable. We have questions like, why did God allow this awful thing to happen to me or to my loved ones? Why didn't he step in and prevent something? Where was God in the midst of all of that? And I think this text has some things to say to us when we have questions like that. I think that's the power of it. Where we look at Abraham's story and what it falls in the biblical picture, we've ever since Genesis, at the beginning of Genesis, the story is asking the question, how is God going to redeem the great mess that humanity has begun to make of the world? What is the hope for the world? And it seems to go well because we thought about last week, God has promised that through Abraham's descendants, he's going to bless the world. And there's going to be sort of a mediation between God's presence of heaven and earth, and things are going to be restored. And now, although since the last week we've had the child of promise come and Isaac is on the scene, it now looks like all of that is going to be over. And there's another thing going on in this. We thought last week about the call of Abraham, how God called Abraham from seeming obscurity. He wasn't a guy who was churched or who was part of the family of faith or people of God. And God plucked him and called him and said, I'm going to do something with and through you. Are you going to respond? And he says, yes. And now we have this story of the kind of gut-wrenching cost that that's going to have for Abraham, of actually responding to the call of God. So I want to think about what's going on, and I will get to God's faithfulness, but I think with the nature of the story, we have to travel to get there. So firstly, I want to look at the tests that God sets in this passage, and then look at Abraham's response of faith, not obedience, but of faith. And then thirdly and lastly, God's response to that of his provision. So let's look at the test that God sets. Sometime later, God tested Abraham, so we know from the get-go that's what he's doing. He said to him, Abraham, and Abraham says, here I am. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. Mount Moriah is actually where the dome of the Holy Rock is today. This has got amazing, there's stories in the Quran as well. It's got huge historical significance. He says to him to do this, and do you notice the corollary with last week, where in terms of the journey of faith, Abraham doesn't get much detail. Take him to the place that I will show you. Same as last week. I'll give you the details later, but here's what I'm asking you to do, and I'm asking you to move out and begin to do this. Now, a couple of things to say to try and bridge the world between this text and the Bible and ours. Firstly, that as much as this seems a long way away from anything we recognize and barbaric, when this was written, and to the first audiences and hearers of these kinds of texts, wouldn't have seemed that crazy. Abraham and some of the places we thought about last week, Ur and the Chaldeans and so on, child sacrifice was immensely common. And so, that's not to say that it's very good that that isn't in the world you and I exist in, but we've got to appreciate the fact that this was something that was more normal. So this wouldn't have been the first time that Abraham heard anything like this. It wouldn't have struck him as completely bizarre, yes, painful, but not completely bizarre. Now, that's not me making an apology for it in any way, just trying to get you and I to understand the text and the world that it's written in. But the second thing is that the Jewish people have always had the idea, and so have other ancient Semitic peoples, that the firstborn is something that is prized and coveted by God. That is something that is sacred and that it's to be offered up, and that goes from the very basic, the first fruits of the crops every year, or the first animal to be sacrificed to God. But sometimes pagan cultures would take that to be their children in the most horrific and literal way as well. So all that together, this has a resonance and understanding for Abraham that it doesn't for us. But he doesn't get much detail. And then he's asked to do the unthinkable. He's asked, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and sacrifice him as an offering. So Abraham is now in a relationship of worship with God. He knows that he owes God a sacrifice, a debt of sin. That's why we say a prayer of confession every week. That's universal to humans. We know that we have wronged a holy God, and so there is a debt of sin to be paid. This is the way it was done in the ancient world and in ancient times. And he realizes that it's got to be his son. But the problem and the anguish for Abraham is twofold. He's been asked to sacrifice his son, your only son, whom you love. And there's obviously that love connection with, as any of us have with our kids. So that's the first thing that's unthinkable that you and I can all relate to. But then he's being asked to get rid of the promise that God has made to him. Do you see? Because God has come to Abraham and said, through you, I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth. And Isaac is that child of promise. I told you I'm going to give you a land that you'll inherit. I'm going to give you many descendants. And also this relationship that you and I have, this promise of blessing, that is going to extend out into more generations, where this curse is going to be rewritten because God is going to bless the world through you. And God is effectively saying to him, I know that I asked you to, I know that I told you all of that is going to happen, but now I'm telling you that's going to die. And your hopes of that happening has to die, as far as Abraham is concerned and in his understanding. Everything that he had relied on and believed his faith to be about, he's being asked to kill off. And the hope that he had for his future and for his children's future. It's not even like he's saying, Abraham, I want you to take your own life as a sacrifice. In a way, that would have been fine for Abraham, because he would have thought, well, and the ancient people thought much more collectively than we did. He thought, my line will go on. The promise that God gave me will go on through Isaac. So that would have been much better. He's asking him something far more painful and harder on multiple levels. And we need to reckon with all of that. What he's actually taking him into is a sense of God-forsakenness. That's what the commentator Walter Brueggemann says. He's saying, come into the utter darkness of all the promises and the goodness of God being reversed. That's what I'm inviting you into from your point of view. And what do we do with that? Well, the first thing is we've got to acknowledge that and feel it. Because do you know what the problem is if you make this just about Abraham's obedience? You and I are meant to feel the tension of that. Because you and I often live in that kind of world. We're meant to feel the weight of the testing of God, and the fact that Abraham can probably see nothing but contradictions in God at this point. What on earth kind of a God promises all that good and hope to me through to my descendants, and then asks me to kill all that off and to give it up and to give up my child? It sounds incomprehensible. And it is. Even John Calvin admitted that there's a contradiction here in the way God behaves and what he's previously said. Meant to feel that. It's existential and it's anguish. And we're meant then to get to the point of seeing that we have a God who can and who does test. What's a test? A test is the opportunity to discover what's really inside of us and hopefully to grow, but we don't always know that that's going to happen. It's an ability to see that this is a God beyond our comprehension and understanding. You see, they don't fully understand God, the patriarchs, and it does them a great service, and does us a great disservice when we think, well, they had perfect understanding. No, they didn't. They didn't understand God fully, and we don't always understand what God is up to and is doing. And that's where we find the common connection with these stories of faith, is we're being invited actually to a God that we can't fully understand. It's in Exodus chapter 15, when the children of Israel have been delivered from Egypt, and they reflect through poetry on the kind of God they have, and they say, "Who among the gods is like you? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders?" I think with the tests and the way tests appear to us in life, one of the worst things we can do is flatten things out and make God smaller. And just give ourselves a comforting, smaller God that's actually an idol of our own makings. We're actually given and invited into something much more powerful, although terrifying, in Scriptures. A God who can and who does test. A God who cannot fully be understood. But can I offer you the fact that that's actually better? A God you and I can't fully understand? Because if we didn't, we would just have a God that looks a bit like us, something of our own creations that looks and acts and feels a bit like us, is generally nice and has nothing to offer us or to say to us amidst the trials and the horrors of life. What we're invited to here, and what Abraham is invited into, is a God that he can't fully understand, and who tests, and who reserves the right to test. Now, if that's where the story left us, and that's where God left us, I don't think we would have much hope. But I think we need to be given that foundation, particularly in the world that you and I are living in, particularly when there's the temptation just to make everything smaller and more palatable. We have a God who tests and sets this test for Abraham, and we feel the anguish and the pain and the contradiction of the fact that we can't understand what he's saying or doing in Abraham's life, or sometimes in our lives. What's Abraham's response? It's one of faith, not primarily obedience, because when we place this in the canon of Scripture, what does the writer to the Hebrews say? By faith, Abraham did what he's about to do. So the first thing he does is 22 verse 5. Abraham says to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." So there's an indication that Abraham has some understanding that despite the fact that God has asked for this, and he needs to do the unthinkable, he gets up early, he's filled with anguish, as any of us would be. He doesn't know where this is headed, but he has a hope, however dim and distant, that God is going to come through for him. And so he says, "We'll come back together." Some commentators have said that Abraham, even primitively at this point, has a belief that if God has asked for this, then God has the full power to resurrect Isaac, should the unthinkable go all the way. And then, in probably one of the most painful parts of the passage, Abraham and Isaac are in conversation, and Isaac asks, "But what about the burnt offering?" And in verse 8, Abraham answers, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. The Hebrew is really interesting because The word for provide and for see are pretty much identical, and there's wordplay in this. What he's saying is God will see to the burnt offering in the way you and I would use that. God will take care of that. Abraham being asked to give up everything that he loves and being asked to sacrifice his son is going up the mountain, is having to enter a dialogue with him and offer some kind of peace and some sort of reassurance to his son. And what he says is, God will take care of this. You see, he's not relying on himself passing a test. He is not putting so much stock in his own obedience. He's not made a calculation that, well, if I do what God asks, then everything's going to be okay. What he's actually doing is putting stock and faith and hope in who God has revealed himself to be thus far. And he's saying, to himself in many ways, I don't know how, but God is going to see to this that the sacrifice is taken care of. And he continues to put one foot in front of the other, and he believes that at some point God is going to come through and deliver him and them from this. And he continues to move forward in faith. And I would put to you that that is what faith in its essence looks like, and this is one of the greatest pictures that we have of faith. He's not a perfect man. In the chapter before this, made a mess of things trying to pass off his wife as his sister because he didn't want to get into trouble. Didn't really seem to be a model of faith or example then. But when it really matters and counts, we see that despite him not knowing or having much detail, he moves forward and he does this. And this is the invitation in the passage. This is what faith looks like, because it meets us at the point of our actual reality, not hypotheticals, not something far away and distant in the future, the now and the pain and the darkness. Because Abraham doesn't actually know what's going to happen, but he believes in the God who's speaking to him and calling him to do this. And there's a verse in the New Testament, or there's a cluster of verses that Paul writes that are often used and abused. Have you ever heard the phrase that God won't give you more than you can handle? I've heard it said to me. I hope I haven't said it in good conscience. But it's not true. You can't find it exactly in the Bible. What Paul does say in Corinthians is that God will not test you beyond what you are able to bear, and he will always provide a way out. And it's something like that that's going on here. So I want to reassure people that have been told that, because sometimes people have been told that and it does a lot of damage, that God won't give you more than you can handle. And you find yourself in a heap in life on the ground thinking, this is a lot more than I can handle. Life will give us a lot more than we can handle. And sometimes we will feel like we're into this God-forsakenness that Abraham's in, and like he's allowed us to be covered in darkness or allowed circumstances to pile up that we don't have an explanation for, and we can't possibly see where his light or goodness could be at work within it. And he will allow that, and a bit like point one, a God who tests, we do have a God who will allow us to get there. But here's this connection of faith, and here's where it comes in. God will not leave us in such hopelessness that we can't be delivered from that, that there won't be a way out of that. And I think that's what faith really is. It's such a trust and a reliance and a dependence on God, not on ourselves, not on our ability to handle any current or future situation, but a reliance on God that whatever he does, whatever darkness he does allow to wash over us, that he'll also take us through it and out of it, even if we don't know how. And I actually think, I could close the Bible, I think that's the real power of this story. That he might allow that, but he promises, and all you have to do is exercise the faith that Abraham had. You don't need to know how it all ends up or where it goes, but that he will be with you through it. And it is my prayer for all of us, and indeed for myself, that when or if that day comes and I'm found myself in that existential anguish, wondering where the goodness and the promises of God are, that I'd be able to have just enough faith to say that although God's allowed more than I can handle to come on me just now, that there's enough light that I can see that he will take me through this And eventually he will take me out of it because I believe in him. And I'm not relying on myself or my obedience or my ability to pass this test. I just believe in him, because that's actually all we have, is faith. And what's the alternative? Because I hear so many objections to faith, because, well, how would a good God allow such suffering to me or to others? And I always say, but we're going to have suffering anyway. None of us can get out of this or around it. That is the nature of the world that we're in. But what we're offered is a God who will take us through it. And even through these tests, when we have suffering, that we're able to grow, and that we're able to see that through the faith that he has implanted and given us, that we're changed, that we grew, that we became better, that we became different. We're not the same person that went into it. All because of this little gift that he gives us, which is more powerful than anything in the world, called faith. And so Abraham responds, even amidst the most horrifying darkness, in faith. And then lastly, let's look at what God does provide. God firstly provides through all of this. This is the fruit of it. This is what comes out of this really powerful story. This friendship and connection and relationship to God that is unsurpassed. The angel stops him, and God says, "Now that I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." And then the Lord says in verse 16, "I swear by myself." This is the first time God swears by his own name, and this is the base of all the future promises of the blessing of God's people in the Bible. That because you've done this and haven't withheld your son, I'll bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars, and your descendants will be blessed, and so on. Abraham knew God to a point up until now, and God knew Abraham to a point. But there's a sense of so much tension and anguish and growth through this story. And you and I know this, that you only really relate and you only have a depth of relationship with some people when you go through some things with them. Good, bad, and indifferent. And that's the invitation from our great God through faith to Abraham and to us. He now knows, and what you need to do with the story is suspend the 30,000 feet stuff of, yes, God knows everything. Yes, of course he does, and I confess that too. But that doesn't mean that you and I don't experience this dynamic of growing and changing through relationship with God, and that's what happens here. Abraham now knows the goodness of God in a way he couldn't have imagined before, because it's real. And he's intervened, and he's delivered him, and he's rewarded the little faith that he had to just do the simple things. He's rewarded the fact that he trusted him in the darkness. And God knows Abraham in that. I don't think God lacks any knowledge, but one of the mysteries of faith is God desires a connection and a relationship to us in the way you and I experience relationship, and intimacy and growth and nearness. Here's what I got out of it this week as well in terms of relationship. Remember, Abraham's existing, and the people reading this at first are existing in a world where it's normal, it's run of the mill for the pagan gods they're surrounded by to ask for the most unthinkable sacrifices, children, whatever. I wonder if "now I know" includes Abraham going, "Now I know you are nothing like the other gods that we're surrounded by. You are completely different. I've gone through this, and I know that you love me, that you love my family, and that I can fully trust my children with you." And that's, for many of us, that's the most precious thing that we have, and it's that invitation to trust and know God on that level, come what may. But the other thing God provides as well as relationship is, of course, the sacrifice. So Abraham called the place "the Lord will provide," and it's said to this day, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." God provided the fact that the ram was there, the burnt offering could happen, the worship still took place, because God provided it. And the hope that you and I have here today, having gone through the anguish of what Abraham did, hopefully, and felt the tension and the impossibility and the mystery and the darkness, the unknowable and unsearchability of a God who tests, but also then the power of having faith even in anguish and darkness. What we have above all else is God from today's point of view. In Romans 8:32, where it says, "Him who did not even spare his own son, how will he then not graciously give us all things?" You see, the resolution for this is that Abraham doesn't have to give his son. But what we just celebrated at Easter is that God, in order to deliver you and I from our sins, wasn't afforded that blessing and privilege, and that he had to give up his own son. And his own son had to willingly, just as Isaac willingly went and lay on the wood and stretched himself out and was prepared to follow and trust his father, so the Son of God trusted as he was stretched out as an offering for the sins of the world, that his father knew what he was doing. And so, because of that, you and I stand here today, pardoned, freed from sin, able to trust in him, able to have this connection that Abraham had. And so if he's given us his own son, how can we not trust him to give us everything that we need? Because he is a God who, on the mountain of the Lord, was provided for Abraham, and it'll be provided for you and I what we need, come what may. May God bless his word to us this morning. Amen.
Thank you for tuning into our channel here at Erskine Parish Church. We create this and give it away so that it can be a blessing. Everything that we do here in the church relies on the generous backing of those who support us. And so if you would like to become one of them and give something back, then we've made it as easy as possible. You can go to erskineparish.com/donate, and there you can give a one-off bank transfer. You can set up a regular standing order or donate by PayPal. You can also download a gift aid form so that if you're a UK taxpayer, it increases the contributions that way as well. Thank you so much for watching, and we pray God's blessing on you.